everybody has their own, there is a God to fit everybody's particular need, right? Like until eventually they start to pull everything into themselves and start to take like an insane amount of accountability for themselves. And then once that happens, along those lines starts to come a lot of isolation, because you don't need the same projections to look you in the face. You don't need the same interactions. Like you can pull it all in and understand it all within yourself with throughout less stressful things going on in your life, less combative situations. You can see those energies. And from there, that's where man and God really start to become one, where people start to move more into that Krishna state of mind, that Christ-like, Christ and Krishna is the same word. They're just from separate language origins. So that's sort of that. But all of that to say, when people ask, why did God make us? Or who is God? It would be good to start asking yourself.
All right. So the war within, my friend, Carl Jung has been really inspiring to me recently. Again, I've been obsessed with psychology and understanding it. And I love Carl Jung because he's not only talking about psychology, but he differs from Freud in the sense that he's into the mysticism, right? He's into the archetypes, the mythos, kind of like the deeper understanding, and not just like a reductionist view, which is how he actually described Freud, And so I know you're into Carl Jung too. So yeah, man, it's such a fascinating topic, because if we look out in the world, what we do see is that there are wars. There's been wars for how many thousands of years? Why? And I think what he understood is that it is part of a war that's within us, within our psyche.
Yeah.
How do you see it?
This is that's absolutely true. I mentioned this lightly in book one that I just put out, but the energy of conflict has to be like, we're here as humans on Earth to learn the mechanics and how to handle and manipulate all forms of energy. And the energy of conflict is one of those. And war is like an extrapolated aspect of a collective subconscious, whereas people, especially like in the earlier understandings of like a religious context, there's a right and a wrong. And by default, I must be right, which means there has to be wrong. Well, that's got to be the other guy, because it can't be me. So they're wrong and I'm right. So now there's conflict. And what happens is eventually people get through enough conflict. This is why you see I've spent enough time around guys that were like Marines and pro fighters and all this type of stuff, where it's like, after a while, they do not need conflict. They are very at ease with saying, you win, right? Like they're over conflict. They're not like afraid of it nor hiding from it. They've spent enough time in conflict where they're just past it. They're just done with it, right? So the energy of conflict is a classroom. It's part of the curriculum we've all got to go through, until each individual handles their own inner conflict and accepts that whatever they see out in the world has the potential to be part of how they might be living if they were in that other person's shoes, or if the circumstances lined up just right to bring that potential out of them. Once somebody gets to that point, judgment can slow down, and they can stop projecting or feeling a need to make somebody else wrong and to pay so that they can be right. And they start to move more from a place of compassion. And then that can start to diffuse conflict whenever it's less about trying to decide who's right or who's wrong. And I know that gets tricky when there's actual wars and there's actually bad things going on. So how do you do that in real time when there's somebody at your door who wants trouble? And that sort of turns into another conversation. But why does it happen? It happens because so many individuals in the collective are not looking at their shadow and not taking ownership of their own inner conflict. So it must project outwards until they stop needing to see it outwardly, and then they can start to own it within themselves, which is another reason why most people at some point on their spiritual journey, once they hit a certain level, they find themselves in isolation. They're at that point where they no longer need the world to be a mirror shining back to them parts of themselves they haven't looked at. They're now like mature enough to look at it within themselves. And by nature, once somebody's willing to look inside themselves, they stop seeing it outside as much because they don't need it out there. They can already see and work on that energy internally. And then that starts to remove conflict.
I've been in isolation for coming up on a year now.
Yeah.
A year. And I totally see why it's needed. And what you're saying reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita, actually,
Mhm.
because so many people look at these mystical texts and they think it's a literal thing.
Uh,
And when I'm talking about the war within, it is symbolic, but we all understand that there's voices that are saying, do this, do that, do this, do that. And if we look at the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the greatest books of all time, it really is. It's the sacred Hindu text for someone that's
Mhm.
not familiar. And it describes the battlefield with Krishna and Arjuna, and Krishna is consulting Arjuna on what he must do. And a lot of people take it literal, but if you're from that tradition and you really study these, not only the books, but this is the thing, you study the culture and you
Mhm.
study how the people that have been in it, that are still in it, they understand its symbolism. And so what you understand when you read these texts, and even the Bible we can talk about too,
Yeah.
is that it's symbolic
Yep.
of the war that's happening within us. And I think if we go to the topic of why is the war happening outside of us,
Yeah.
it's because people can't recognize, I think it's down to two things. People can't recognize relative truth and truth versus falsehood. Because if you could recognize that something is relatively true, then you wouldn't be fighting amongst who's truer, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's like thinking courage is in truth and neutrality is also in truth. Like they're both, you could say, life-giving. So if someone understands that the fundamental ethos of a culture, maybe it differs in how it describes the truth, but that it still is in truth, it's almost as though everything is frequency, and the frequency of what we're saying has either truth or falsehood in it. It's kinesiology muscle testing. This is double-blind placebo studied, where you can push down on somebody when you say something, you can push down on their arm, and your body can recognize truth.
Mhm.
So it's when we can recognize truth, and then when we can recognize falsehood, that's when we'll start to evolve. And we can only do that when we recognize it within ourselves first. And that's the problem, is that we're looking outside of us for the logical truth without getting into the organic intelligence of our bodies and really tuning in to it and getting clear on how truth feels and how falsehood feels and how we experience that. And so then that war without gets ended when we come to face also on a psychological perspective, the Carl Jung perspective, is really with the shadow and understanding that society, to get back to also what you're saying, is you're saying it's kind of like a school. I was literally outside today just chilling in the sun, and I thought to myself, it really is, the human game. We've been talking about it being a game, but it almost feels like it's partly a training simulator. It feels like there's some sort of training simulation that's happening here, but it's still a game. It's not like training, you have to be military training. It's just like
Right.
there's a leveling up process that I am clearly starting to feel, and I have been feeling for a long time.
Yeah.
You know?
So, so many things right there. Yeah, it's a game in the sense that at a certain point where you get good enough at it, just like, when I was in the military, sometimes training was pretty like terrible until you've done that particular training enough times, and you're like, oh, now I know what I'm doing, right? Like that's anything. Anything's pretty miserable. When I was forward learning to tie my shoes, I lost my temper and threw them across the room, right? Like that was terrible at one point, right? It was more than I could bear. But anything you do long enough, you grow into it. A way to look at that, people always, this has come up and in some of my one-on-one calls lately, people have a lot of questions about the Bible and viewing it from a historically accurate lens or from a lens of mythology, where it's just relaying a universal truth, a truth that is as true in any time, place, or setting. What can personally be taken out of it? Yeah, truth should be true no matter when or where it's at. But the Bible is the story of the evolution of consciousness, not just for man, but for God. It starts off with man and God hanging out in the Garden of Eden. God seems pretty chill, almost aloof. Man's pretty chill also, almost naive. And then from there, they say go. God says, now the man's become as one of us to know good and evil, to become as one of us to know good and evil. So mankind starts to move itself up the levels of consciousness. Whereas the moment you start asking the questions, wait a minute, who am I? How did I get here? How did all this get here? That's like level 1 of human consciousness. You are now no longer in the animal world. You have entered the shift up to the divine. The frequency is now rising because self-awareness has kicked in. And from that point, there's an idea of a God who's overbearing, egotistical, like quite difficult, very demanding, right? That's the story of that's the version of the God in the Bible when you look at like Abraham, like the beginning. Prior to that, God was also just kind of popping in and dealing with Adam and Cain and Enoch and those guys. And that was different, which, by the way, each of those names is an age. It's not an actual human person. It's like a period of human evolution. But anyways, the evolution of consciousness, there's man and there's God. They're very separate. And as man begins to improve and create stability and create order and have a sense of what to do and what not to do, how to follow rules, because at first, I don't understand why I shouldn't do this. What do you mean I shouldn't? Like, why is there a rule that says I shouldn't, like, bestiality's bad, right? I mean, I've been out here in the woods for months. I feel frisky. I see a goat. Why not? Right? Like, why not? Right? Like, so, and God said, don't do it. You'll know why later. Just don't touch the stove. It's hot. Right? So as the consciousness of humanity gets higher and higher, God starts to meet more in the middle, helping out more, like making more sense, being more explanatory, until they eventually meet in the middle, which is Jesus, which is it a guy or is it God? Right? Well, it's both. And that's the whole message, was that's where we're all supposed to be and really are heading. And there are like breadcrumbs throughout the Bible that indicate that is very true. Nobody gets locked into an eternity of hell. That's not even in the Bible. There are many verses that indicate that's where we're all going. The reason it doesn't just say that in the beginning is because that would sound like, hey, just do whatever you want. Everything's all good. Well, no, everything's not all good. We're in this school, in this game, where there's a karmic system put in place so that you reap what you sow. If you plant an apple tree, you're going to get apples every time. If you go do harm to somebody else, that will come back to you in one way or another. That sort of stuff. So while we're here and while we're growing, once we become self-aware and start asking the big questions, the game has begun. We are now in the classroom, and our vibration, our awareness is moving out of the animal mind and into the divine mind. And Carl Jung, especially at the time he was doing that, was one of, as far as I know, one of the best and maybe one of the only people in the secular, professional, like collegiate space that was also talking about it, including the aspects of mysticism and spirituality, and where psychology and spirituality meet, because psychology is like the upper end of the animal mind that should start bridging the gap between the spiritual mind, where it makes sense, it's logical, it's not just totally woo-woo, but it's also not totally religion and function and form based. There should be a bridge happening there. And Carl Jung kind of nails that.
That is such a beautiful description of psychology. I have never thought about it like that. Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. It's the bridge.
Do you get into sociology as well? I've always like, since I was a kid, I've liked both. And I've from what I can tell, psychology is the person, and what happens in the person happens in sociology, groups of people. It just happens over a much longer period of time. But the same changes and evolutions and, back and forth process of a person advancing, that happens to groups of people just over much larger periods of time. And it looks, whereas a person might relapse into like a drug addiction or something like that, pockets of society relapse into war or poverty, stuff like that, or versus advance. Anyways, just psychology and sociology go the same. And I think it's almost like required to look at both, like how individuals behave and how societies behave, because there's sort of a mirror there.
Of course.
Yeah.
There has to be, almost, because it's just like humans, we're all playing the same huge game. And so there's going to be a certain set of the population that particularly plays the game this way, where they relapse. And it's almost like that's because there is a hero's journey. As Carl Jung was actually into the hero's journey as well in that mythos. It was part of some of the mythos he was into. It's not just the hero, there's different archetypes.
Right.
But I think it's because there's a cyclical nature to humanity. It's not just only spontaneous and random. There are patterns. And so if there's patterns, we can recognize those patterns. And I think that's part of what psychology is. It's recognizing patterns in the human psyche. And when you recognize patterns, that's kind of what science is too. But it's not the only way to basically, the problem that I have when it comes to like reductionist materialism is kind of the paradigm that you have to break things apart in order to understand them. But what I'm saying is that you also have to, and what you're saying is you have to look at the whole organism and see how it behaves also as a whole, not just as parts, because when you have the whole, you can get a greater view of what's actually happening. And so you can't just like remove or ignore parts of the human psyche, which is the spiritual, That's why Carl Jung said, if you're studying psychology, you have to study parapsychology, which is the psychic, is what he called it. And it makes sense because it's exactly what you're saying. They are a bridge.
Right. Like we are here. That's why we are human beings at this time. There's nothing new about this, right? There have been mystery schools and like spiritual pursuits in any number of ways in every culture throughout all of recorded history, right? Like that's part of who we are. We need to know, like we need to see beyond the veil, right? Like that's just part of what we're here to do. But that is also part of what we're here to do. A lot of times when people start wanting to know God, the reason there's not a uniform definition of God, like we can define what a teacher is or what a psychologist is or what a farmer is, but why, or any number of things, right? But why don't we define God? Because there is a God that exists for every person. Like every person has an image and a feeling, an idea of what that is, whatever that supreme most high is. And it always matches, it always mirrors back their level of consciousness. If it's, if it's in a 12-step program and it's somebody who's completely ashamed and doesn't trust themselves and they're doing their very best just to admit that they are like heading in a wrong direction and they need help. Well, they need a God that's benevolent and mighty and the place where they can lean on, because they can't lean on their own understanding. Likewise, people that are in need of mercy or in need of correction or in need of something to rebel against or whatever, they need somebody to blame for all the problems in the world. Like, it certainly can't be my fault. It can't be my unintegrated shadow that's projecting out and magnifying these problems that I see. So it's got to be their fault, and it's got to be God's fault, and it's got to be this gender's fault or whatever. What the fuck is that? Why does it do that?
You got some sort of gesture.
I don't know how to turn it off. But there's a like everybody has their own. There is a God to fit everybody's particular need, right? Like until eventually they start to pull everything into themselves and start to take like an insane amount of accountability for themselves. And then once that happens, along those lines starts to come a lot of isolation, because you don't need the same projections to look you in the face. You don't need the same interactions. Like you can pull it all in and understand it all within yourself with throughout less stressful things going on in your life, less combative situations. You can see those energies. And from there, that's where man and God really start to become one, where people start to move more into that Krishna state of mind, that Christ, Christ and Krishna is the same word. They're just from separate language origins. So that's sort of that. But all of that to say, when people ask, why did God make us, or who is God? It would be good to start asking yourself, okay, if I was all there was, if I was the creator, I was before the alpha and I'll be after the omega, there's nothing except my self-awareness as pure consciousness and unlimited potential. How long would it take before you as that would start to get bored and start to want an experience outside of simply knowing yourself as pure consciousness? So maybe you might think, I'll make all this stuff. I'll make a universe and I'll make an earth and I'll make creatures. And how long from there before you start to want companionship of something that's not a pet or a lesser being? How do you, as the original, create a companion. So from there, perhaps we as the children of the Most High, who are also like in this earth school, who are the bridge between the carbon material world and the spiritual light angelic world, we are both. We're in a body and we are consciousness and we are energy that can be in any number of ways observed that exceeds outside of our physical body. So as we are all of those things, and as we are growing and learning and our consciousness evolves, we are here to be as gods, to know good and evil. Through the process of firsthand knowledge, we can then know why we were told to do or not to do, why these energetics work, how best to honor our true divine nature and not be ruled by our animal flesh nature. There's certainly plenty parts of it to learn from it, from experience, to appreciate and enjoy while we're here, but eventually moving beyond that into the more divine so that the original has actual companions that are somewhat equal.
Yes, sir. Such a fascinating concept. It reminds me of, in Hinduism, they have this concept called the divine play, or lila.
Lila.
And it's this concept that everything is the creative act, the divine drama of the creator. And it leans into what you're saying. So what you're saying is not a new idea. It's actually a thousands of year old idea that why is this happening? Because dramas are interesting. And what is the most interesting drama, you could say, is one where we don't know what's going to happen. I say that about movies all the time. Right. When I watched Interstellar, blew me away at the end because I really wasn't expecting that ending. I was like, bro, this has got to be aliens, right? This has got to be a movie about extraterrestrials. When I watched it, I was young when I saw it first time. But it wasn't. And I'm like, oh, I get the excitement of being like, oh, shit, that's what happened. And it's like, that's what this reality is. It's like the excitement about, oh, I just don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so many people nowadays take that like, shit. Like, I'm pissed. I don't know. I'm scared of what's going to happen. But if we understood that we are the Brahman, it's like God is not outside the creation, because if there's only God, God is inside the creation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fundamental difference between that Western view and the way that a lot of the Westerners see it. And I think this actually comes down to that wasn't the original meaning, and I'm not convinced that was the teachings of Jesus originally. Mm-hmm. And then you might say, well, why is it that he's like, it's not God? It seems like he's outside of us in the Bible, right? And you're thinking, okay, bro.
It is to a level of human consciousness who is unaware of its own self. Like knowledge of self separates you from knowledge of God, because there comes a point, the Christ consciousness, the point where it's one and the same, where Jesus could say, I'm him. Check this out. Lazarus, get your ass up and come. I'm him.
That's him.
Yeah. Get up, dude. Get out of the cave. You're alive now. Get out. Right? Like that. But also when somebody calls him good and he's like, don't call me good. Like there's such a depth of knowing that I am him. Like, bro, like, you know what I mean? Like I will walk in your temple. I will sit down and make a whip, where he sat down and fashioned a whip, and I will tear this whole bitch apart. But also, I'm just a guy, right? Like I need to wash your feet. I need to serve you. I need to serve. At no point did Jesus really did the story of Jesus, if somebody wants to look at it like it's mythology, because at a certain point, it gets really hard to look at all of this as a factual, historical document of people's lives, the way it all plays out. But from a man's perspective, it gets really hard to look at it. Like, and you start to ask, okay, if he was human enough to exhibit frustration and joy and fear, at what point did he ever get to have it his way? At what point did Jesus ever get comfortable, right? Comfort's a big motivator. Sex is a big motivator. At what point did he ever get to do all these things? And the whole story of Jesus is like perfect service to illustrate the connection of humanity to God through Christ consciousness, being of one mind, one accord. May the same mind that's in Jesus be in each of us. Talks about whenever whenever to this day, when people read the laws of Moses, there's a veil over their hearts, but not for us. When we read it, it's like there's the light of God shines from our face. So that whole concept of like becoming one with the nature of God can't happen until somebody knows thyself, which is also not a new concept at all. That's been going on for thousands of years in many cultures. The concept of knowing thyself is the same as knowing God. And it may start from two separate ends. Like, I'm going to know myself, and then I'm going to go do this other thing where I know God. But eventually, like, the more people do both, they really do start to merge. And people like Carl Jung, people like what we're doing, where so many people are being attracted to these conversations right now, is because a lot of people are like right there where they're just about to be like, oh shit, I'm looking at a mirror. Like, it's not me and this big separate thing. I'm looking at a mirror right now. And how to make sense of that in a way that doesn't make somebody go off the deep end one way or the other.
Real quick, I wanted to interrupt the podcast to let you know that we're doing something special here in the month of May. The 7-day live Shadow Integration Challenge starts on May 13th. It's for self-sabotagers. If you feel like you're self-sabotaging, if you feel like you're overthinking a bunch, if you feel like there's a war within your psyche. Well, we talked about Carl Jung in this podcast a bit. We're going very, very deep into the psychological model and the truth given to us by Carl Jung. And so, if you enjoyed this podcast or getting value from the talk about Carl Jung and the shadow, or just in general, you want to learn more and really start taking action, not just learn and have knowledge, but actually take action and see your timeline shift for sure, this is the challenge that will propel you forward. And this is a perfect time for transformation. It's in line with the seasons of nature. We're coming out of spring, heading into summer. Time to propel forward, time to really shift into your highest timeline and your highest potential. And I'm here to help you with just that. We go live starting on May 13th for 7 days. You can join the challenge now by tapping the link in the description or going to 7dayshadow.com.
Yep. And it doesn't get you too ungrounded to the point where you just like are trying to escape this reality. You know, what is the medium? Part of what you're saying is Christ consciousness. And I want to give a definition of Christ consciousness. This is from Yogananda. Okay. Paramahansa Yogananda, who was the Kriya Yoga master who came to the West in the 1900s, a great mentor of mine for sure. And I've done a ton of content about him, but this is what he said about Christ consciousness. He said, Christ consciousness is the projected consciousness of God eminent in all creation. In Christian scripture, the, quote, only begotten Son is the only pure reflection in creation of God the Father. In Hindu scripture, Kutastha, Chaitanya, or Tat, the universal consciousness or cosmic intelligence of spirit everywhere present in creation. The terms Christ consciousness and Christ intelligence are synonymous with cosmic Christ and infinite Christ. And so I got one more little bit here. It is the universal consciousness, oneness with God, manifested by Jesus, Krishna, and other avatars. Great saints and yogis know it as the state of samadhi meditation, wherein their consciousness has become identified with the divine intelligence in every single particle of creation. They feel the entire universe as their own body. And that's profound, because I think it's very important to get clear on what we mean by Christ consciousness, because a lot of people have different definitions of it. And so when I'm saying Christ consciousness, I'm saying this, that the term specifically, I think one of the most important parts is spirit everywhere present in creation. Mm-hmm. Everywhere. Mm-hmm. That means that Christ consciousness is not exclusive. Mm-hmm. It's just a way to recognize in the Western culture a being who reached a realization of what he really was. But that's not exclusive to Christ. And so you might say, okay, that's interesting, but why does it seem like there's back and forth in the Bible? Sometimes it seems like I was saying, a God outside of you or a God inside of you, like kingdom of heaven is within you. Okay, right. That's interesting. It's because of the mystery schools. The same idea of a mystery school. Why is there mystery schools throughout history? Like, we know that existed. It's not a fantasy. It existed because humans fear what they don't understand. And when you don't understand something or something is so far away from your current worldview, you just want to get rid of it because it challenges the preconceived notion so much. And that's happened throughout history so many times. And if we want to keep asking why, because we can fucking go down the rabbit hole, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
The reason why is because if you want to continue to study the Kriya Yoga tradition, you'll find a book called The Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar. We've talked about this before, but very quickly, the Yuga cycle, if we're in the descending part of the Yuga cycle, which the Yuga cycles are, it's basically the expansion pack that is a cycle. We cycle in expansion packs for humanity, and it's like a circle. So if there's a high point of the expansion pack at the top, and if we're at the low point going clockwise, like it's on a clock, imagine a clock, noon is basically the highest point of human consciousness, and then 6 o'clock is like the lowest point.
Right.
Well, if you're going to 7, right? If you're going to 7, then it's going to be natural that if you're at a low point in human consciousness, that nobody would know what's going on, and people would, again, be caught in fear because they just want to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the case, then it makes sense that the traditions would need to hide information within texts. And so if you're hiding information in text so that if you have the knowledge, if you have the understanding, if you have the will to understand the deeper meaning of things, you can see it. And that's what's happening with the Bible. There's a deeper significance as to what these things mean, but they had to be hidden. Why? Because we already know that they took a bunch out. They changed with the translations of the Bible.
Right.
It is clear, it is documented that there are translators that translated it in a way where they changed it based on the content and the context. There was a whole argument of, how are we going to translate this? Do we want to translate it basically word for word, or do we want to do it by the context? And so if you're not actually fully translating it just how it is, and you're thinking this is what he said, but you're not read on the symbolic meaning of things, then you're going to change it in a literal translation so that you're going to remove what it actually means on a mystic level. And so these people who actually wrote the Bible knew that they needed to encode information in it that these people would not be able to recognize. And just like you said, there are parts of the Bible, I think you're talking about earlier, that there are names that are not actual names. Yeah. Right? It's so throughout the Bible, but the way that they literally keep us down in the West is to convince us it's literal. That's the point I'm getting to, is that the entire premise of what I just said is that a literal interpretation takes your power away. And when you don't know what you really are, the literal interpretation will convince you in a fear sense of what you need to be afraid of. And then you become controllable. There's Nietzsche, there's slave morality. Right. Anyways.
Nope, that was perfect. Watch this. This may, so the concept of time, how linear or nonlinear it is, has been part of me since I was really young, right? Like viewing time from a non-traditional lens is part of me. So when you watch a movie and it's total fiction, but within this fiction, it sets up the premises, right? Like if it's an adventure movie and all of a sudden they find a map that's headed here and they're in search of an artifact that legend tells belong to so-and-so, right? Like you get bought in to all of this stuff and you're along for the ride while they solve this mystery. Well, the whole mystery's a fucking make-believe, right? It's all fiction. So what if, like, the perspective that we live in, what if where you live right now, like your life, all of it was put in place, the concept of a past and a history, the concept of other parts of the world that view things this way, the concept of these teachers that teach things this way, and the concept of a they who hid your power from you, but they didn't do a good enough job because you were able to find yourself where you're at right now. So here's my thoughts on mystery schools. Mystery schools are the they that gatekeep the same knowledge that's available to everybody, because we all have a way to let our frequency connect to source frequency and get direct downloads. What is the block from that? That's like the divine inheritance. You get that when you graduate, right? Like you get your trust fund when you clear enough stuff. That happens naturally. But along the way, when somebody starts saying, okay, I need knowledge, and the powers that be, are hiding it, they're lying, they're coding it, right? Like all I have to do is you're telling me all I have to do is read the Bhagavad Gita carefully, diligently, day in, day out for 20 years, and then it'll reveal itself to me. That takes a long time. I'll just, like in the West, right? I'll just go to church. There's a preacher. He puts on a great show 3 times a week. He'll deliver the same message and he'll cry at the same time every time. He's awesome. There's a rock show at the beginning with a smoke machine and everything. And
there actually is. That's not even a joke, though.
It's not even a
joke. It is kind of a joke.
That's right. So that's what I'm saying. So there's like elementary school, and then you hit puberty and you're like, fuck that. They're full of shit. I'm not listening to that. All of that's wrong. And I think I might, whoever their God is, I don't like him. I'm going to find my own knowledge. Along our own knowledge, there's a couple of ways to do it, but it's ultimately, are you devoted to doing it? Like you and I had a personal talk, right? Like there are any number of ways where we both could probably make our physical material, like our way in the world could go smoother if we would just pretend and just play along, right? Like in certain ways. But we've got to a point where it's like, can't do that anymore. Got to tell the truth to myself. So that's part of it. Now, telling your truth will lead to either spending your own time in isolation, doing your own shadow work on your own accord, like self-motivated to do this research and do this work, or looking for a shortcut, which is a lot of people to teach you directly. And that can turn into these mystery schools where people are gatekeeping divine truth, and they're making initiates, they're having rituals, they're having ceremonies and tests and things you have to go through to make your way into it. And that appeals to somebody who is in a place where they need to prove their worthiness or be validated externally. And as somebody who joined the Marines when I was a young man, that is an energy that I played with in a certain way. I was always like interested in conspiracy theories or things like Masons or like things like secret societies, but that seemed like for whatever reason wrong or scary to me. So I had to like look for external validation or look for external tests in these other places to eventually be like, wait a minute, why the fuck did I do that? If I had just like, you know what I mean? If somebody had shown me how to like do other more local things, like how to meditate properly, how to read my holy text that I grew up around as the Bible. But there are ways to play through the energies and gain your own knowledge, because there's nothing occult. Occult means hidden, and there is no hidden knowledge because we are all animated by the same spark of the divine as everything else. There's no power outside of us that is operating from a power greater than the power that's in us. And once that starts to get owned, not from an ego place, which says, sweet, now I can go conquer my enemies, or now I can go like ball out and build a business, or maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's what your family needs. Somebody who's so fixated on balling out that they're the person that establishes generational wealth and lets the next generation have enough security to evolve in another way. But all that to say, tying back to the knowledge of self, knowledge of God becomes one. There can't be any they that took your power from you. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be here. If we were born into a prison matrix, there would be no escape, because it's been existing for, on paper, thousands of years before we got here, assuming within this fiction of our life, this story that we're playing out, we believe all of those threads in the background. But the reality is we're here. It's our life. Like I started, it began, and part of the story I'm living has this whole texture in the background for me to play with and be distracted with and like take a long time before eventually I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I don't need to play those games anymore. I'm going straight to home. I'm going straight to source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. The prison planet idea, I think, is just based in victim mentality. I don't totally agree with you.
Yeah.
If this was a prison planet, then it would be really done better.
It would be inescapable, right?
The just on a political level, it would be way done better. You know what I'm saying? Like it would have to. They could really make it so that people believed it. But if you look at the clown fiesta that it is, to me, it's a sign that that's just a show to wake people up.
How laughably obvious it is at this point, especially.
Like, could you not find like a 50-year-old dude with the gray hair that's just like extremely villain, intelligent Lex Luthor? It's like, it's out there. Why isn't that happening right now? Because it's a show. It's not meant to win. It's meant to show you your power. That's the thing that people don't realize is if you start looking around, you start studying it, it's clear that it's for us. This is happening for us because there has to be a point in human evolution, in the evolution of consciousness, where we recognize falsehood. Just like I said earlier, we have to be able to recognize it. If we are an innocent species who doesn't understand what it really is and how it works, then we're never going to be able to fully evolve. And I see us evolving into definitely a more advanced civilization. And in order to do that, we need to be uncontrollable by that falsehood. And that falsehood, I do believe, does manifest as an energy. And so, yeah, I think that's part of what you're saying for sure. And there are mystery schools. And if you think about it, on the topic of mystery schools, Star Wars is a mystery school. Like it's a mystery school movie about the mystery school of the Jedi and how you can't let some people in because, you know, they're too old and they won't be able to do it. And so there's like an age limit, and then they're not sure if they should let this dude in because, you know, he could destroy them, but they end up deciding. And then what happens? So the story of Star Wars kind of is a mystery school interpretation of what happens when someone doesn't gets the knowledge, but then like is tricked.
They got it too soon.
So that's like the thing.
Yeah.
If you look at, this is a really fascinating and bizarre kind of point that if you, the thing that the so-called controllers of our reality right now, it seems as though there are controllers and that they've withheld information. And it's almost like there is a human tendency to think, oh, I'm the parent. Like look at what you're doing. You're not really up to speed. So we'll just control it. We'll control how things work. And you just kind of, you know, you're not ready yet. Or you're not even ready. Like, we are the ones who know what's really going on. And then if there's nobody to put them in check, over time, that shit gets convoluted. It's just the fucking nature of being human that the good intention of like, we want to help you, like, it can definitely, that's the innocently ignorant. If you don't recognize falsehood, if you can't recognize it, that's what's happening on like the upper echelon level right now. Those people can't recognize falsehood. And so when they can't recognize falsehood, they're in it. And then it's like, we're getting treated like kids. It makes fucking sense that that's happening. But what you're saying is that that's not it. That's not it anymore. We need to tell people the truth. And that's what I'm for. The
truth, for sure. That's, like how much sugarcoating, how much directing how much manipulating by changing or altering or filtering truth down to what you think people can, you know what I mean? Everything that somebody needs for their growth or for their entertainment, right? Like whatever, when you open your, like a social media app and you're on the search page or the For You page, or when you open your eyes and look at the world and go into a town or whatever, there's endless data points that could attract your attention. And people see what is a match for the truth of their frequency, right? Like, and this was why did that thing just make another fucking bubble? And this is why hold
on. For people that are listening, we got to explain this. If you can't see what's happening, he's like doing like a half-ass thumbs up, and there's like some weird mechanism in his software that's like putting a thumbs up on the screen.
Oh my gosh.
That's happened like for the last 3 podcasts. We're going to have to figure that out.
I'm going to Google that I'll figure it out after this. But the idea is that there are any number of things. There are any number of potentialities that exist that will present themselves to you so that you can find a match for the truth of who you are. Now, at some point, your truth might become so no longer enjoyable or entertaining that you might be ready to break the addiction. Like, I have been addicted to war, or I have been addicted to whatever. And we're talking on the personal and at the societal level, right? At some point, like, how is there such thing as a society like Dubai or Japan or whatever? Like, how are some societies getting to a point where collectively they're like, moving in one direction and some societies are moving into another direction. So this happens on both levels. At some point, whatever the energy you have had starts to become boring. We've been the empire for thousands of years. We've been on top. This game is boring. Do me a favor, clear the deck. Let's start again. The Roman Empire falls, right? It doesn't happen like that, but collectively, that's what happens. That's why there are rises and falls. That's why there are cycles. Because at some point, there is a whole new crop, whole new generations of people that don't recall necessarily how society got to the point where they're at. They're just here in this current stage and setting and plot line. And for their hero's journey, something must happen. Whether they need to experience the fall, or they need to do the work to build the new foundation, or they're part of the group that's on that secure foundation that starts trying to figure out how to create the next stage of advancement. So that's part of why it just goes round and round, and why when you look around the world, there are so many different frequencies. It matches what the truth is, not what somebody thinks they want. Like I may look around and think I should want this because it exists or because I saw someone else want it. But the truth is, if you're happy where you're at, you're going to be where you're at. And the moment you really aren't, whether you're in a good place or a bad place, good or bad, wherever you're at, the moment deep down, the truth of you wants something different, shit's going to change. And then the things that you find yourself paying attention to, the things that you connect with, the things that you click on your phone, the things that you like, every moment is a choice. You've probably seen this one. This is something I've touched on before. There is free will and there is predestiny. Free will is right now, the imminent, immediate moment of right now. I have the free will to choose whatever energetic state I want, to either look at the truth of myself or make up a story and pretend I don't really see myself. And I can choose whichever forward direction I want. But outside of this instant moment, this ever eternal unfolding that I am always in, I'm never really in the past or the future. All of that belongs to God, to the mystery, to the unseen power that seems to be at work in all things. That is not mine. I'm not allowed to always see or manipulate or build it, because I am in the fixed focal point of Cleburn. I'm in a fixed point of attention along a linear timeline. And from here, I can get glimpses of the mystery. I can get glimpses of the infinite, and I can be given tons of synchronicities that remind me there is a connection. But I am in this body, unless my energy kind of comes and goes a little bit. But along this body, there's a fixed place on a linear timeline where my consciousness knows it's right where I left it every day when I wake up. So moving from there, that is effectively where our free will is in this immediate now. What's my energy? What's my attention? Where am I going to place it? Outside of that belongs to God. And the more we attempt to handle that or direct that, that starts to become like the way Lucifer got kicked out of heaven for wanting to be God. He wasn't happy right there being in connection. He needed to do it. So the moment I, Cleburn, from my limited 3D perspective, start wanting to overly affect what the future is going to look like, or get overly opinionated about the past or other parts of the world, that starts to pull me out of alignment. It starts to fragment me. And it casts me further down to earth in some ways, versus when I remain open and I choose to be in the highest vibration of love, and allow myself to be more of a vessel or a channel to be love and truth, so that love and truth can flow through me and out into the world. And that is ultimately where wars can stop, where shit stops being the way it is. And that's part of where society is splitting right now. The people that have been doing that work, that really truly want to move in that direction, that to be a cohesive society of sovereign individuals that are collective focused, not me first, you second, but all of us, all as one. That's sort of where the shift is happening.
Interesting. So how do you discern the difference between that desire you're talking about, that lower desire, and when you're like you're saying, a vessel for truth? How do you discern the signal of what is coming from that higher intelligence and what's coming from like this carnal mind?
From my ego, anything ego minded is almost always motivated from a sense of fear or a sense of lack. A lot of the things that I would think that I want or need are really things that I think I need to prove that I can get because I don't have it. A lot of that plays into personal development. It plays into material pursuits. When you look at someone like an Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is sort of we have like several people like that throughout history, but icons, things that we can all see and form opinions around. That's why icons exist. So there's the icon of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had a rough childhood and was so narcissistically motivated by that pain that it drove him to do all of these great things. Meanwhile, all that pain inside of him that was unresolved caused all of these things to go wrong in his personal life and in his home. I don't know if you heard that story, how he like had a child with his house cleaner, with like the family maid, who like remained the family maid. So this kid ended up looks just like him. It's crazy. But this was like, all this stuff's going on. But in the world, out in the world, this thing that he was faking, this thing that his pain drove him to do, became this sort of icon of, if you set your mind to it, you can do it. That's somewhat true for people who are, like at a starting point and they're like, I don't know what to do from where I'm at, but I see somebody out in the world who appears to have made it, and they're delivering a little bit of truth that gets me going. It gets me out of the mud that I'm standing in. It gets me out of the situation with my parents or with my health or with my whatever romance life. And it gets me moving towards that. Along the way, you can kind of see the truth of why this is really an icon. And it's not this person, this human isn't quite like what you would have thought. They're not this savior. But when you hear people like Schwarzenegger or Conor McGregor, or these people that talk about how they have this like vision in their mind, part of that is like divine will. That's like, you didn't just have a vision that you thought up randomly, that you made it happen. They got a glimpse of where they needed to be moving, and they were pulled in that direction. And nobody becomes like on the global stage without a lot of support. So all of these like supporting cast, all of these guardian angels that pop into their life that help put them to a point where they can become an icon. So something for everybody to look at. They didn't get there really on their own. They got there because we need icons to look at. And we don't just need one religious icon or one like holy figure. We need several that are closer to the ground where a lot of people are starting from. We need icons that are closer to the material and the ego, which is really fear and lack based. But that gets us moving. It gets us at least started. It gets us out of fear and out of apathy and moving a little bit beyond neutral. It gives us enough hope that because it's within reach. You know what I mean? So how do I tell the difference? What do I need for my evolution or growth will either push me or pull me. It's either going to like light a fire under my ass that I have to get away from, or it's going to shine a light in front of me that's so bright I can't help but run towards it. That's really the only way to sort of boil that down. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I think I've done all of the running that I can for my, I have personally Cleburn added enough real life experience and enough playing in all the different energies to where there is no more pretense. Now I sit still. If something feels hot, I sit in it and it teaches me things. If something looks shiny and glimmering, I know where that road really leads because I've been down it before. So I'm in a place of kind of sitting still and becoming more open, more empty of me. I must become less so he can become more, that sort of thing. So I'm observing what flows through me to create my world as I allow my inner world to become more clear to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And I'm thinking about one thing that comes to mind when you're talking is I think a lot of people who are into spirituality can start to see materiality as a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I just kind of see it as a game. It's just a part of the game, and material wealth is not a bad thing. And it just is an energy that's available.
Just an energy that's available.
Imagine if the thousands and thousands of spiritual types got to the point where they had as much as Elon Musk. What would happen in the world if they had that type of influence, right?
Right.
If someone who had a really solid moral foundation, it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter, I don't give a shit about that. I'm saying someone who had some really solid principles, not just someone, but many. So I think part of the problem, you talk about the war outside of us, is that the people that are leading us do not have that. And so I think it can be a mistake to think that we need to move away from playing the entire game. And playing the entire game, your true nature being someone who isn't abundance, has an abundance of things. And that is part of that divine kind of inheritance that you will feel within, because you will feel that wholeness within yourself. You might hear me say that, you might think that's abstract. Like, how could that make sense? How could it be your divine inheritance? Well, if your true nature is wholeness, then is wholeness lacking anything? No. So there's a difference between you can have something and hold on to it in grip, which is what a lot of people think that, oh, if I have money, I'm going to grip onto it. It's going to cause attachment. It's not the same thing. Yep. I mean, we talked about the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is big on detachment. Yeah. So do your duty, but without attachment to the results of your actions. Boom. One of the most popular verses.
Do it without attachment to the results, right? Like I can be in charge of my attitude, my energy, my effort, my wishes, right? And there are plenty of times where you can see it in the world, and I've experienced this myself, where there are times where my work yielded really great fruits, and there are times where as much or more work didn't do anything to benefit me or give me what I was hoping to get in exchange. When in reality, they're doing it for an exchange is coming from a sense of lack. I'm doing this because I need this, right? Like, or I want this different thing. There is a truth to that, obviously. Like our bodies, we live in this system. So if I want an apple tree, I've got to plant an apple seed and watch the tree grow and keep it alive until it starts producing fruit. So there's that. But effectively, remaining in the flow of the eternal unfolding, and just choosing what my energetic state is, and letting God decide when it's going to be harvest season and when it's going to be, fall, spring, winter, summer. That part's not up to me. All I can do is keep going and letting tomorrow show up however it's gonna.
Yeah, it's like you're in the Matrix. You're downloading a program, right? Mm-hmm. And when you download the program, you have access to that reality of being that. And it's kind of like if you wanted to say, what is creating your reality, so to speak? And if we're all creators creating creations, which is kind of the premise, like the first thing we said on this podcast.
Yeah.
Then that's kind of what creating a reality is. It's like you decide what program you want to download, and you generate that skill, or you generate that gameplay, that type of gameplay, the experience of playing it. In a video game, it might be like the talents. You choose your talents. And so in the Matrix, he downloads a program to Tai Chi it, right? But at the same time, it's like that's kind of what we do. We download programs and we learn things, but it's never an amount, it's never a question of worthiness.
Right.
And I think that is at the core of the shadow, is thinking that other people are worthy because of this, because of that. And if I could just say one message to humanity, it would really be that there's no one better than you. There are just people that have decided to do things, and that when they've done those things, they've accomplished things. They made a decision, and maybe they did something that is unseen, that we can't measure. Maybe what they've done, not all of them, but maybe some of them have connected to what they are here to do. And of course, that path might seem like, how is all this miraculous stuff? Well, maybe they've deconditioned themselves. They've integrated the shadow so that it's no longer running their life. Because, I asked you the question, how do you tell the difference between the different types of things coming in and what to follow? And I think it's very simply, there's different types of desires.
Right.
There is the desire of the pleasure of the material senses, and Buddhism is big on that. Hinduism is big on that. Kriya Yoga. The traditions of the East massively important, that sense desire is the cause of suffering. And it's not because this is the problem with Westerners, who we could say New Age in this sense, because to me, New Age is you take these old age traditions and you don't really study them. You just hear like a little half thing and you regurgitate it.
Yeah.
But if you get really close to it, you'll find that the reason why these Eastern traditions say that material sense gratification is suffering is not because it's inherently bad. It's because it can lead to suffering because you attach to that being your source of happiness or gratification.
If you have something you can lose, right? Like
and exactly. So if you're attached to having things outside of you, inevitably you're going to be like, oh, I'm enjoying this so much that like when it leaves, I'm going to be super sad.
Yeah.
And so the real question to me of spiritual evolution is, how can we experience things without getting so attached to having them and truly being in the present moment and feeling fulfilled? And I think that the answer to that question comes partly from somewhere where I think most people aren't going. And it's, if you feel like you're genuinely leveling up in your daily life, if you feel that, and if you feel powerful and confident and worthy within yourself, then when something happens and you're enjoying it and it might leave, you might say, I'm not worried about not having it anymore because I know that it's just going to come back again in a different form, because it's not just a one-off thing, because I, within my nature, know what I am. I know thyself, as you said earlier. And if you know yourself, then you're going to know that these things aren't just going to leave and never come back. The nature of reality is cyclical. Look at the seasons of nature. That's just how this shit works, you know?
Boom. Yeah.
Yep.
Knowing thyself looks a lot like proving or earning or getting or finding out or validating or invalidating externally, until at some point it clicks that like your worth is inherent in the fact that you exist and you are aware of yourself, and that the same things you do may get one response or one feedback here, but those same things when done over here will get a different feedback. So there is certainly good to measure responses and feedback of things that you can adjust, but who you are, what your worth is not determined by what the world is trying to tell you, whether it's good or bad, right? Like, you know, the world may give one guy $1 billion. Maybe he deserves it. Maybe he doesn't. The world may crucify a Christ. You know what I mean? Like, so
that's worthiness, bro.
Yeah.
That cracks the code of worthiness. That story. Think about that.
Yeah.
Was Christ unworthy, so therefore he got crucified?
But
that
is why I was saying also earlier that the part of the human school is to not only become aware of that we're not just animals, we're connected to like that Garden of Eden state. We're connected to whatever the divine is, whatever the creator is who made us in their image. Which, by the way, I've got a big thing for like languages and etymology and stuff, like real simple one. We go into this, but like the Lord's Prayer that Jesus said, pray this way, our Heavenly Father, hallowed be thy name. The first word he said is abun, which is it's a conjunction of Abba, which is father. This is Aramaic, and wun, which is womb. So he didn't call him father. He called him father womb. He called him parent, creator. And then the word he used was a gender neutral word that when it got translated into Greek, they decided to call it father because they weren't quite sure. You know, they didn't have a word that matched what he was doing. And for people who look at how languages interact, like you touched on earlier, once it starts translating, some languages have 2, 3, multiple genders, right? And it changes based on the context, but the same word that can mean he or it or she, you know what I mean? Like we don't have those many words. So we don't have a word that interchanges, or we don't know how they meant it. So we got to pick one. So anyways, the same creator that created us in their image, which God said, create us in our image. There's a male and female component to all of our observable nature. That is so that there's not just clones. If you've ever heard me talk about this, how like everything that I am as a human being, all of my epigenetics, all of my latent potential, every cell in my body, that one cell went from a sperm and an egg to create a new thing. Now there's all these cells that duplicate and form a whole body. Parts of it became bone, parts of it became a heart, parts of it became my brain. There's all these cells that are their own innate consciousness that are performing functions and going through their life cycles. Every now and then they'll duplicate and one dies, and it goes through its life, and then it duplicates, and then it dies. That's all going on inside me. Like, what motivates that? What makes each of those things do what they're supposed to do and go through their own life and their own seasons? That's part of that as above, so below. Like, God is in the macro, God's in the micro. So what is in me? All of those trillions of cells that have that knowledge can all fit down into a sperm cell. Same thing with a woman down into an egg. Like, all that I am, all the coding of me can fit into this tiny microscopic storage device. Same thing with a woman. But then when they combine, it's no longer just making a clone of each other. It's making parts of each of us and leaving room for a brand new thing to be created. So part of us, the creators creating, once we tap into, like, I'm not just an animal, I'm not just a cell moving around in the body. I have become aware I am a cell surrounded by infinite cells in a greater body that I can't see this, because I'm outside of it, or I'm inside of it. So, but tapping into that, that's sort of like Christ consciousness is like if you're forming in the womb and there's a body part. I talk about this all the time, but like, so my hand, if my hand gets cut, all the cells are going to start trying to repair it as best they can. They're going to do it on their own, but it'll also send a signal to my brain that says, hey, fucking hurt. If you want, you can get your other hand to come over here and help out and put a bandage on this or something. So there are many parts happening within my body, and people really need to spend time thinking about this, like how the body works in order to know thyself and know your relation to divinity and infinity. Creating an awareness of, but a separation from the physical body helps a lot, in my opinion, which is why almost no spiritual practice is without a physical outlet or an advocation for physical practice, physical work, physical disciplines. But so all those parts of my body that are going to do their thing, they're going to heal a wound. They'll also send a signal called pain to my brain that says, hey, I need your attention. We would like it if you would help. So that's like people. And the signal, we can call that prayer. Or the direction to move. How does my hand move? Did it just decide it's going to move? Or did whoever I am decide, hey, I want you to move? That ability was created over time through formed connections where these cells were forming in my womb. And then at some point, a nerve pathway connected between the two. And now that there's a nerve pathway, that's like Christ consciousness, whereas a person is a cell in the body of the universe of God. Once they come online, once those nerves connect, once they hit that divine inheritance, they are the person connected to the divine source. And the Holy Spirit is like an electric impulse that sends the messages back and forth, where it's like, you hear my prayers, right? Like I can hear your instructions or your guidance or your innovation. Or you think about parts of your body that like ache for a long time, so long you haven't even noticed it. And then one day you're doing a meditation, you're sitting around, you're like, oh my God, I've had a pain in my side for all this time and I've been ignoring it, but what's really going on there? And you find out you've had like some issue that needs your attention, right? That can be like, I used to get so mad at this. I was like, why is there a story about, people in the Bible? Why were they 400 years in slavery before God finally got off his ass? And he's like, I've heard your prayers. I'm coming to help, right? Like, well, how often do things go wrong in our body before we even start to notice them? Like, oh, that's been going on for a while. I should pay attention to that. And then you address it. So all of that to me gets hard to explain because there's so many layers that are not separate, but they're only separate when you look at it from that point of view, right? Like I look like a human person, but if you put me under a microscope, I look like a lot of tiny little round things. Depending on how far in you zoom. If you go too deep, it's like an electron, a proton, a neutron, and a bunch of empty space. That was a rant.
That's wow. Okay. Yeah, from there, the intricacies of the body, and when you're mentioning Arnold Schwarzenegger, I kind of wanted to go down the rabbit hole of steroids.
Okay.
That's where I thought you were going with it. I'm like, yeah, dude took so many steroids just because there was like an insecurity there.
Yeah,
because that's a fucking problem. That is a fucking problem. It's like on a side tangent. It's a huge problem in men specifically. Is the idea that we need to become fucking bulk monsters,
dude. Societal expectations, right? Like steroids or just in general, I like alpha behavior in guys. Same thing with like plastic surgery in women, right? Like hey, you're 50, you're beautiful. Like, why go do all these things? Like, because society, the blanket overarching societal expectations for women are based around their beauty and their capacity to mother, right? Like, will they have kids? What kind of mother will they be or not be? And what is their beauty, sexuality? Like, that is the overarching expectation of women. And then for men, it's strength, power, and status, right? Like, we don't necessarily have to be pretty. We don't have to have great fashion sense or all that kind of shit. But it's important this is the societal expectation that we are made to believe that what defines someone as a man is how much strength they can seem to possess, whether that's financially, whether that's influentially, whether that's with being 270 pounds and juiced out of your mind or whatever. How can you take up the most space? And those are leveraged. They leverage that by turning that into women becoming consumers of every nonsense chemical and product and beauty trend. You know what I mean? Like, beauty trends drive me fucking nuts. Like, a handful of years ago, it was big this body part, and then it was big this body part, and then in the 90s, it was, you got to be 85 pounds or you're overweight. Like, these things change all the time, and they keep women going in circles, spending money, spending time, spending energy, worried about how someone else says they're supposed to look to be found attractive in order to find a mate. And guys,
I'm saying about men, yeah.
And guys are supposed to be this or that, which really turns itself into spending time and energy doing shit they shouldn't, whether it's steroids, whether it's devoting too much time to figuring out how to go to war because it's romantic. You can prove yourself in the theater of battle or whatever, until everybody on their own individual journey hits a point where they're like, stop fucking telling me stop that shit. I am that I am. My worth is inherent regardless of what the circumstances of my immediate times and environment may say. And from here, I will choose to pursue what I feel like is the most high for myself. That takes a lot of balls, and it can look a lot like being an outsider, which is an innate natural fear of ours, right? Like, not fitting in with the tribe and getting kicked out, and then you're on your own in the wilderness. It's better to stick to the tribe and survive than be on your own sometimes.
Yeah, this reminds me of the psyche. Because I think what we're saying here is, why are men taking gear?
Yeah.
Why? What's the point? And it comes down to the shadow of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And it also comes down to, so in Carl Jung's model, you've got the persona, you've got the ego, which ties in arrow up to persona. Then you've got the arrow down to shadow, which is unconscious. And the medium between the unconscious and the conscious is a shadow.
Mm-hmm.
But the persona you have here, it's this idea. What you're saying is like the persona that society tells us we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The performance.
And so we think that we are that, or that we need to be, and that there's that standard.
Yeah.
But I think the deeper issue is the unconscious becoming conscious through the shadow, mirroring to us insecurity, saying, I'm not good enough as I am.
Right.
Therefore, I need to do something that I know is potentially harmful to me. Because it's clear. The data is clear that taking gear is harmful to your body.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? Well, it would be out of an insecurity that you need to look a certain way in order to be good enough. Either if it could be multiple things. It could be to someone else or to you. Like, what is your standards? And so then I think the answer to this, if you were to say, well, how do I solve this issue of like, I don't feel good enough? Well, there's two things. I think the first thing is ask that shadow what it really wants.
Right.
Like, what does your shadow really want? Does it want to, if you're on gear or you want to work out just to look better for other people, what does that shadow really want? And I think if you look deep enough, at least my shadow was, it just wants to feel good enough. It wants to feel confident in who it is. And so then it actually goes into the deep level of anima animus. The concept being that every male has a female counterpart within their psyche, inside of them. And then vice versa. The female has a counterpart that's male. So another problem is that men constantly chasing women. all the time. And I think part of the reason why this happens, and you see this womanizing mentality, even in like the top upper echelon of spiritual leaders are still womanizers. It's fucking embarrassing.
Yeah.
Or let's just say this. Not embarrassing. It's fucking primitive.
Yeah.
Let's say that. And the reason why this is happening is because there's a part of these men who are constantly chasing women that has that female counterpart within them that Carl Jung called it, right? It's suppressed. Mm-hmm. So if there's no nurturing aspect within yourself, if there's no sense of, you could even call it kind of this loving, mothering part of you, if you've suppressed that, then you're going to constantly be seeking it outside of you because you're not feeling whole within yourself. And so with these womanizing men, the solution is to figure out, well, not really figure out, but realize within yourself that kind of feminine counterpart that exists within your psyche, and cultivating that and balancing it so that you're not always chasing. Because what happens is Carl Jung said that the shadow manifests itself by mirroring outside of us the emotional charge of what's happening within us. Mm-hmm. And so that mirror is showing us, okay, how can I then nurture myself, bro? Like sometimes I have to go, like if I'm feeling that, sometimes I'll go and I'll lay in bed and I'll just fucking hug myself and I'll just be like, hey, bro, like, what do you need right now? And it's like, I just want to kind of feel loved because, I've been out here by myself. And so, when I just give myself a hug and I'm just chilling and, I'm actually like cultivating that, I feel a sense of wholeness. And then I'm not looking for it in a woman because I can give that to myself. I don't need someone else to give it to me. That's what it is right there. Yeah. People looking for someone else to give them a permission slip to feel a certain way. But if you go within your psyche and you integrate that shadow, you can feel that wholeness inherently.
Right. If you keep doing all that inner work, you're going to miss out on all the fun of all the trauma bonds you could have otherwise until
yeah. Hell yeah, dude. Sounds fun, dude.
Yeah, come on. Fuck my life up. Yeah.
That is kind of what happens, though.
That's totally right, though. Like society, there are so many layers of separation between divinity, between man and woman, and then people among themselves, where if you do it right according to societal standards, you become a man, and a man are these things, and it's totally not these things. So you need to find it somewhere else, when in reality, it's like suppressed in you. So when you do find it in the external, it's like, how can you not see it somewhat perversely, right? Like you can't, because you haven't even started to see it in yourself. That's back to also the season of isolation that you, by the way, embracing it and going through it and not looking for a shortcut out of it. Just for like you, if anybody's listening to this and it translates, great. But for you personally, like the capacity to have like surrendered to it and let that be the thing that empowers you and teaches you, is giving you things that like cannot be taken away, which is why like your spiritual power increases significantly when you don't, take the shortcut or cut off your dark night of the soul, like your like intense class period. We all, that's the whole story behind Jesus's 40 days in the desert, which by the way, 40, that happens a lot, right? He was 40 days in the desert, 40 days back on earth after the resurrection. Noah's Ark was 40, 400 years in slavery, 40 years in the wilderness after slavery. That's all pregnancy talk, right? Like you're in the womb for 40 weeks until you're born. This is all part of the rebirth process. That is also a big theme in the Bible, but like you going through it and not being like, this sucks, I'm lonely. I'd rather, find someone to hook up with, or I'd rather find someone to be with or whatever. You like not taking shortcuts out of it is, in boot camp, like this still happened. Like when I was in, like guys, try to kill themselves or try to get kicked out or like attack a drill instructor to get out early. And they'd always say that the fastest way through boot camp is to graduate, which is kind of true, because like, as you're going through, like you advance enough level to get a real serious season of isolation. But when that starts, most people are like, fuck this. Like, right. Like I'm getting what the world would call negative feedback. Right. And I certainly probably should have done this way sooner in my life, but I was like, maybe hiding behind my kids and saying, I have to be this for them, or I have to provide this for them. So I can't think about what's on my mind right now. I've got to go perform. And that like stalled stuff that I was like not really looking at and learning from because I was avoiding it, because I was like dipping out every time things would get uncomfortable, like taking shortcuts out. But there is no getting away from the things that are inside you, because it's always right where you're at. And it's every now and then you have to stop and you're like, fucking came with me, stupid shadow. Like I thought I left you. I was running as fast as I could. And as soon as I stopped, it's like right there.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you a funny story. It's actually really ironic you bring this up, because when I broke up with my ex in last July, I went into isolation, but I basically didn't face anything. I just kind of distracted myself,
zoned out,
and the shadow completely got a hold of me. And I started to realize this. I think this is really part of it. Unconsciously, I didn't even realize that was what's happening.
Yeah.
And then I started to catch on. And so then I didn't post as much, and I haven't even kept up on as many podcasts, because I just realized how much shit that I had to deal with within myself, and how much I had to integrate my shadow still. And so I used that time to go within. And as I did that, I spent, some time in New York in the summer, in the wilderness. And then I went to North Carolina, Asheville, beautiful. Then I went down to Florida, and I really started to get it in Florida. Something started to really click in Florida. That was in like January and December. It really started to click. And then literally came out here to Tennessee in the wilderness to isolate again, and on purpose, because I was like, you know what? I just need to be alone. I feel like this is the season I just really need to step in. And then I got here and I said, you know what? I have a friend in Texas. And I was like, you know what? I kind of want to go just hang out, be around some community, be around some friends. And I feel like maybe my season of isolation is over. And my friend says to me, bro, I got to tell you, I think you're just avoiding the work. And I'm like, I don't know, because I kind of want to be around a community. Like, I just think it'd be healthy for me. And he's like, bro, this is your time to build, though. Like, just take this next month, and really just dial it in and watch what happens. And I'm like, I had to sit with it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit with this. And I really meditated on it, and I really got clear. And I'm like, you know what? He's fucking right. He's right. I was avoiding, and I was about to run away, and I was a little bit uncomfortable. I was yearning for a community, and I realized that was a thing that I was using for escape, rather than like something that was like a pure desire only. Right. And so I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? And I just said, fuck it, I'm gonna commit. And dude, for the first time in my life, I'm actually really, really enjoying being here alone. Like it makes me think about how people will settle just to not be alone. And how when you're truly okay in who you are and what you enjoy doing in your own presence, and you're not bored of yourself, you actually have a high standard for who you're around, because you're like, I enjoy this. I'm not gonna just let anybody just come in and fuck with my energy. Yeah. So there's like a level of like boundaries that you create with other people, because there's not I'm trying to escape my own discomfort.
You know what I think too? I think the concept of boundaries is like the perfect energy to observe masculine and feminine energies at work, for people to observe it within themselves, right? Like, because it's a masculine energy to uphold a boundary, to tell people no, to say, these are my standards to get here. When, it makes people not happy when they want something that goes against your boundaries, but fuck you. Like, this is my court. There, like, I'm the temple of God, right? You want to come in here, have your shit straight. That's dims the rules. There's gotta be a wall and a guard at the front that says, you don't come in this town unless we check you out first, and we make sure you are part of the harmony that we have built in here, because what's in here is harmonious and peaceful, right? Like, that's part of why I protect the women and children, not because they're weak, but because they're valuable, and they're valuable because they don't have to turn into these hard things, right? Like, this can look simple, right? Like a husband and wife, wife's putting the kids to bed. It's been a long day. Everybody's stressed, but dad says, hey, I started a bath. You go relax. I'm going to put the kids to bed. Not to get sex or anything, but just to like help her like soften first, help take care of that femininity. But as an individual, like you see women that are, people call them bitches or say they're in their masculine when they're a little too direct or too this or that. I can guarantee you, I have not met a woman in her masculine who wouldn't immediately drop that fucking armor and like soften into her femininity that she does already when she's on her own, if she had a safe enough place to do so. But life has created that person where they have to be the one always arranging things, holding boundaries, doing this stuff, holding up that masculine energy, which gets exhausting. So the concept of setting boundaries is a perfect place to look at how taxing it is to have to uphold that boundary, how you can't do it if the masculine is wounded, or you'll overdo it if it's a wounded masculine. Like having a healthy masculine that can politely say, no, thanks, that's not for me. Just because, whether it needs an explanation or not, or can do it diplomatically, that is a healthy masculine energy to protect the inner femininity, which is that like, I love myself. I can't self-sabotage. I can't like abandon myself. I can't like tell my inner child, go give them a hug because they want a hug, right? Like, or whatever the case, right? Like my inner child, my inner feminine is at peace. It's chilling. It's good. And my masculine is going to make sure it stays that way. Rather than say, hey, go out there and entertain the guests, right? Like go do this, go, they want us here, go do that. Like letting the feminine overgive. Boundaries are hard to keep up with when operating from a space of wounding, but that I think is almost a perfect place to like work on and observe and help heal inner masculine and feminine within the individual.
Yeah, I think nowadays people would call it inner masculine and feminine. When he called it anima animus, I think it's
Animus.
Really, it's the same thing. Really. And I think you're right on a lot of that. I think if we know what we are, if we know what we're capable of, it's like this interesting concept I've been playing around with. We can perceive ourselves playing the game at a certain level, and then there's like the reality of what level we're actually playing at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is, if we're talking about like moving in the direction of stopping the war within happens when the shadow, I think, is like, I want to play the game at a higher level. And you're like, I think a lot of what's happening in the spiritual community is that the shadow wants to play the game at a higher level, but the manifestation teachings are like so watered down that people are just like, I'm playing the game at the high level. I'm doing it. Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm trying to affirm it. Yeah, I'm going to get it because I'm affirming it. But you look at their life and their daily life, and it's like not even close.
Right.
And so the shadow unconsciously and subconsciously, you can call it too, knows that. And so the discrepancy is there. And that's why I think it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said before, if you really have designed a life like an architect would, or like an artist would, you design your life in a way that feels leveling up, whether it's working out, it's qigong. What do you want? What feels like leveling up to you is the question.
Yeah.
Then that inner satisfaction, because I think what inherently the human wants is progression in the game, or creation in the game of what they want to create.
It's alignment. Like if you do what you say you're going to do, it will yield positive feedback. And then that begins the momentum of like self-belief, which is so many people, like they're almost start with a fitness journey or like a physical health journey, right? Like a taking ownership of the body and how to feel at home in it seems to be a common thread that a lot of people find that as like a really good foundation for whatever your spiritual, personal, financial, whatever your pursuits are. There's almost always a physical aspect because that is like the foundation. Can I feel comfortable in my body? Plus it yields pretty fast responses, right? Like it may take a month, but that's just long enough to see that if I'm consistent and faithful to my works, to what I've said I'm going to do, oh, here comes the fruit of my labor. It's right there. I can do this in these other ways too. It translates so perfectly to other areas of thought and energetics.
Yep. And I think the key, to make this really practical is when your actions align with
Yeah.
what it is that you want to create. That is really the key to this reality. It's so simple.
Faith
But
without works is dead.
I mean, that's really
Bruh.
what it is, right?
When your actions
Wow,
align.
I forgot about that, but
when
that's
you're-
essentially what that's saying.
Alignment, and then integration is people ask this, like, when I'm doing calls or whatever, or integration is the only step forward along the path, right? Like a path implies there's movement, and people are always looking for tools. Should I do a shitload of mushrooms? Should I go do this? Should I do that? All of those maybe are tools. There may be like a machete that helps clear some of the brush out of your path along a new path you're creating. But the only thing that is that step forward is integration, which is where I've thought something. I have begun a motivation. I want or don't want this. I have set in mind a set of actions. I have been doing it so much, I'm in alignment with myself to where it becomes fully integrated. Just like earlier I mentioned tying shoes, right? Like if I put on a pair of shoes, I bend over, I tie them, like I don't even realize I'm doing it. I'm doing something else. But there was a time where that took a tremendous amount of concentration and effort for me to be able to do it until it's just part of who I can't forget it, right? Like it's going to be part of me. Same thing with like most physical disciplines or playing music or riding a bike. It starts intellectually. You discipline yourself to wire it into you, and then it eventually becomes muscle memory, right? Like from a spiritual aspect, it becomes integration. It truly becomes part of who you are forever. At that point, you no longer have to put the thought and energy and active alignment into it. It's part of you. So around that time, once something's truly integrated, whether you realize it or not, things are going to shift because you have taken that next step forward, and now you're moving into whatever the next thing to be known, understood, aligned, and integrated until the next step.
Boom, dude. Boom. Yeah. And I think that one of the most important things I've learned in my life is it's only sustainable for me. Like change and that higher level gameplay is only sustainable when I enjoy the process of leveling up.
Fuck yes. I was just thinking about that.
If I can enjoy the process of doing it, that is the master key to actually everything that you want to create actually happening. Because you're not in lack. You're not in, I will just grind and suffer to get there eventually. Yeah. I guess I'm leveling up. It's like, if you can, you were talking about time not being linear. If you can drop the notion of linear time and realize everything is a now moment.
Yes.
And the now moment is always here. It's the only thing you'll ever have. And the thing that separates you from that highest timeline is how you perceive yourself in that now moment. Because the now moment, how you perceive yourself in this moment, is going to determine what we might call the future, what we experience. But really, the way that you link yourself to that highest timeline is through here. And so you have to be able to make the connection of, okay, well, if I'm on that highest timeline, how am I in my daily life? Well, you're probably going to fucking enjoy your being on the highest timeline, because that's the highest timeline to me, at least, is I'm enjoying it in the sense that it feels fulfilling and satisfying to do even hard things, to do difficult things. And so if you can find a way to rewire your brain out of the persona, get rid of the persona that society has put on you and said, oh, you are just going to enjoy comfortable things. That's where dreams go to die, is only enjoying the comfortable things. If you can find a way to rewire and recode that brain to the point where the difficult things become the satisfying and fulfilling things, and you are able to recode it so that the comfortable things you can enjoy, but they're not your sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in life, then you are at that perfect balance point of you're not too far avoiding comfort to the point where you're like a maniac and you can't enjoy anything. But at the same time, you recognize what needs to be done to play at the game at the highest levels. And when we are actually doing that, that's when you can actually shift your timeline to that highest one, because in this moment, you feel fulfilled. You feel like you're doing it. And then that confidence drives everything. And if you take action from that place, woo! That's when you truly become limitless, because that's how you stop the war within, is you get these aspects of your psyche, ask them what do they really want. And what you'll find a lot of the times is that shadow really does want. to reach its higher potential, but it's just pissed off because it's not. The energy needs to go somewhere, you know?
Yeah, that's freaking amazing. Yes, that might be the whole theme of this podcast, right? Like alignment and alignment now. There is no not now. There's an idea of a past or a future that might sound appealing, but you can't get there by thinking you're not there and things suck now and I'll wait till it gets better. It just remain in the truth of an energy, which is like lack or unworthiness, versus as soon as you're moving in alignment with an idea, I was just, the reason I got excited, I can't believe you fucking said it. I mean, like, spot on. But I was just today in the shower, like where I get my best ideas usually, or when I'm driving, like trying to replay through my life when the times really felt the best. Everything just felt like right in that sweet spot for a while. And there is no destination. There is no like, I mean, you may hit a goal, but then you can't stay there. You got to go, you know, things are always, you're always right now. And the things that you see in front of you are just rolling by. So thinking you're going to hit a certain spot, well, good, you got there. Now what? You got to go somewhere. You go down or up from here. So that helps put in place the eternal now. The what am I holding on to, and how can I be in my passion, be in my alignment, like do what I think is of the most good for myself, what I think tomorrow me will thank me for, and doing it consistently and with faithfulness helps move that, like that alignment light on. Once you are in alignment, you instantly like feel fucking good. And the things that you otherwise would have want, or maybe even better, maybe it's not what you prescribed for yourself, but something good is coming as soon as you're in alignment because you feel good about yourself. You like respect yourself. Versus anytime you break your own integrity, which is why we don't talk about this anymore. But when I was a kid and like in the old school South, right? Like you don't tell a lie. Telling a lie is a bad thing. Like, because anytime you lie, you are lying to yourself. You're denying your own power. You wouldn't lie unless you were afraid or jealous or whatever the case, right? Like you only lie out of something not your highest, but staying true to yourself, not bullshitting yourself. Like you called into your life a friend who checked you and was like, maybe you should sit tight for a minute. And you're like, fuck, he's right. Like sitting with your truth, which is funny of all things that you are right there sort of at that crux where you're like, I think I'm done with this. And you ask somebody who said something that may not have been what you wanted to hear, but you kind of did because that's who you asked. And that's what you like pulled into your field. Somebody that said, wait a little bit longer. And you flushed out that one maybe super subtle energy of avoidance that's still sort of in there. It was so subtle. And you're so like aligned in so many other ways. It could have made sense to listen to that voice. We're like, nope, it's time. I'm ready. Until someone said, are you? You're like, fuck, no, I'm not. All right. But that's who you called in, right? Like that's what you called into yourself. The subtle energies start to become more obvious, or the things that reflect back to you what you can't quite see are becoming more accurate the longer and more consistently you can live in alignment, versus, you know what I mean? It wasn't like you told it to somebody and then like, sweet, I'm coming out, bro. And they flew out to where you're at and brought 9 friends and turned your house into like a kegger. You know what I mean? Like that's a total extreme that wouldn't happen, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
I've never even been to a kegger. I don't even know what that is.
Right. Like I've
never had a party phase, dude.
Yeah.
I've never been a partier.
Yeah.
It just never really happened. I went to college, but I just lived with roommates off campus, and I was a video gamer. I was a gamer, dude.
Nice.
I was just playing WoW. I was playing League of Legends. I was too busy.
Yeah.
But you know what's really interesting about what you said is you've been talking about the Bible. You've been saying Bible verses for many podcasts. Let me fucking throw one out, dude.
Okay.
Matthew 18, 3-5. And he said, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And you said what? You said, when you get somewhere, you got to go somewhere else.
Yep.
Who thinks like that? Children do.
Can't sit still.
Someone who's creating, and they're just like, hey, oh, cool. I'm going to go over here, experience this, and this is going to be fun. Then it's going to end, and I'm just going to go over here and do this. Like, I'm just going to have fun. And it's not about the competition.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need competition. See, this is the thing about the human game. Sometimes you need competition. People will go from competition to others I'm going to compare myself to others, to comparing myself to comparing to myself, to then eventually, so it's levels. Then eventually you get to the place where you're like, I'm just creating.
Yep. So I'm not a fan necessarily of Aubrey Marcus, but he did have a good quote that competition is sacred, comparison is sacrilege. So I agree that like you shouldn't compare yourself to anybody. Okay, well, also, bro, no man's an island, right? And especially when you are physically young and perhaps spiritually young and aren't aware of yourself fully yet. So sometimes it's nice to see a mirror that either infuriates you or really motivates you to start moving in that direction, because that's part of what you called into yourself, like something to move you towards it. And along that path ultimately reveals more self-knowledge. And it can be anything can be your teacher. But that's sort of what I think, that comparison, obviously not good, but competition is good. Competition is good. Competition, especially like in like, I didn't play like sports in high school. I don't keep up with sports, but I did fight professionally for like 6 years after I got out of the Marines. So that atmosphere was a really good place for me to work through layers, reveal a lot of shit. Yeah. That's why this thing don't work good.
Your nose.
Yeah. But so I needed that, right? Like I needed that outlet because, I had to have it. Otherwise it was going to come out some other kind of way. It was going to eat me up, and it was going to potentially come out, in all kinds of like not good ways. So it was good. It also, that oddly enough, was the environment where I started getting more tools for spiritual development, for how to do like visualization practices and stuff like that. Reading books that I thought were success and self-help and mindset books, but I started noticing nobody in the success self-help space who's reputable, like leaves out at least some mention of the spiritual component or some connection to God. And none of them were picky about who it was. Like all these people started pointing out like these same things. And just recently it clicked on me, like when I was younger and I'd read the Bible and there was a verse that said, no matter what you do, whether you are a slave or a free man or whatever, do it all as though you're doing it for God. And at the time I was like, well, that's bullshit. This is propaganda, because I feel like I'm the slave in this scenario and I don't want to do a good job. I want to bitch about this, or I want to kill the slave owner or whatever. But
yeah, that's Colossians 3:23-24.
Yeah. So, but now that I know what I know more about having read through that so much and realized that it's not all to be taken straight at face value. This is just a series of wisdoms and mythologies and things that should apply to me. And then couple that with years and years of like self-help and success. And I have found that one of the first steps to achieving is always like a right attitude. Having a good attitude is kind of step one to achieving any amount of material, like success in the world. Right now, along with that starts to come some performance perhaps, but you kind of have to fake it till you make it a little bit, like start moving in the direction you were originally aiming until self-knowledge becomes more evident, until self-validation becomes more important than external validation, all that sort of shit. But the concept of step one being a right attitude and a right effort. Notice I said right and right because I'm referencing the Eightfold Path. But
yeah, Buddhism.
Like, yep. Yeah, it's not wrong, right? So to say no matter who you are, do it like you're doing it for God. And then I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so every success person says you got to have a good attitude first. You got to take 100% responsibility first. Like assume wherever you're at, you put yourself there. And only then can you have any hope for getting yourself somewhere different. But it all starts with like owning where you're at. This is a easy version of shadow integration, saying, okay, this is all me. It's all my responsibility. Also all my fault. But okay, from here, I'm going to just start moving in this direction with a good attitude. That's like as cheesy and simple as that sounds, but that's like a common thread. And once I started noticing, I was like, okay, everybody said it. They just said it in a different way. A right attitude. Well, how do I have a right attitude? Do I just try to trick myself and convince myself that I'm happy about this? Well, that's not exactly true because I feel shitty about what I'm doing right now. But I can feel like removing all of the sense of...
why would you feel shitty? What is that in your psyche? I'm curious. Like, just hypothetical.
I'll give you an example. So when I was working in the oil field for a few years. That was not, and I had a lot of fun some days, but that was not fun because I would go away for 2 weeks and come home for 1 week. So for that 3 years I was doing that, I missed 2 whole years of my children's lives, right? And obviously I was still with my ex-wife at the time. This was not a good scenario at all. So I was doing it because I had no other way to make money and provide for my kids. So I was happy that it was doing that it was providing a really comfortable situation for my ex-wife and the kids. That part was good. But the environment and the people I was at were also a pretty good mirror for some stuff that I was struggling with, until eventually I just couldn't do it anymore. I decided like it would be, I could feel better about what I was doing if I was doing something different, even though I didn't know how I was going to move into a different like space of work, or, you know, I didn't have a college degree. I don't have a family networks or any of that. So how can I move my energy? And then I just got so tired of feeling stuck and shitty, and so tired. By this point, I was aware of like how the thoughts I think affect my life. And I was like, I can't keep spending so many hours a day, sleeping 3 hours a night and going to a job where I'm thinking, I fucking hate this, where those words are going through my mind nonstop. I was like, something has to change. And it's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith, but I insist on doing something that like aligns with a true energy that I need to be in. And then I'll hope it works out along the way. And that's, for the most part, been most of my life. So how to get into alignment? Sometimes if I'm waiting for my circumstances to create alignment, that sometimes may not ever happen. So you may have to just decide, like, I have to do something that allows me to be in an energy that doesn't feel like I'm betraying myself so hard, even though it's like risky, or, you know, people have traveled across the ocean to move to the new world. People have moved to new places and settled new lands. What prompts that sort of stuff when you're already in a place? That's for each individual to know, like, why, when and where is it time to sit and pause or enjoy and rest, or when is it time to move on to the next thing? That's for each individual to know. But I would say that it's very good to like accept it. Once that little voice starts calling that says, hey, it's time to go, you're gonna go one way or the other. What some people do is like, nope, I like it here, I'm hanging on. Well, you can hang on, and what that does is like dares the universe to yank it out of your hands against your will. Versus if you maintain that non-attachment state, once you find yourself in a beautiful place, you're like, springtime, this is nice. You know what I mean? Like, or when fall comes around, you're like, well, I guess I better start making sure I had enough firewood collected for now. But resisting the flow is what, didn't you say that a minute ago? Like all suffering comes from resisting or from attachment.
Well, I said, what did I say? I said suffering. In the Eastern traditions, they talk about, suffering comes from. It's fucking gone, dude. I don't remember exactly what I said, but
let it go. Let it go. We don't need to grab that one. If it's gone,
you're trying to grasp onto something. I'm doing exactly what
of all the things to reach for. Let's not reach for suffering. Fuck it. If that one's gone, let it go. It'll come back when it needs to, if it needs to.
Yeah. I think the premise of what you're saying, though, is so on point. I mean, the human spirit, I think, is really leveling up.
Yeah.
Like the true human spirit is, like, I've heard people say, it's man's nature to be polyamorous. And I'm like, no, it's man's lower nature. You have to get clear.
Yeah.
You can't just say that propaganda and then trick people into thinking, oh, this is just me naturally. No, this is the fucking monkey body thing that we're using.
That's spiritual adolescence. That's that like 14-year-old too big for your britches level, when somebody spiritually sort of wakes up and they sort of grasp the interconnectedness of all things. They start to see the spark of divinity at them, and they get to that, I can do whatever the fuck I want and it's all good, which is why they didn't tell me that in the first place. Because, you know what I mean? So if somebody doesn't have enough restraint to check themselves, on one hand, sure, whatever they do is going to teach them something. But more than likely, it's going to be a fuck around and find out type of lesson, not a sit your ass still for another month in silence and see how much more powerful you get lesson. So anything you go do outwardly attaches karma, and to neglect like the massive power of sexual energy, which is life force energy. It's all the same thing. Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. That was a book written in the 1900s. And what did he say? Most like genius men or most great men didn't get that way until they're after 40 because they their sexual nature like takes too much of their time and energy up until then. But healing energy, sexual energy, life force energy, it's literally all the same thing. But in that lower chakra space where it's stuck, people associate it with like procreation. Yeah, the monkey mind, which says, if there's a village, we only need 1 or 2 men and plenty of women, we can repopulate. That's super, super base mentality. So from there, when people hit like spiritual adolescence and they're like, oh, sweet, I'm awake and I'm allowed to do what I want and we should love everybody, which means I'm going to sleep with everybody. Well, no, that's not how that works. It's like it's sloppy. It starts like spreading your energy thin and attaching energy cords to so many other people that are also still like, anyways, I didn't mean to run off with it. I was effectively trying to agree with you. But
no, 100%, bro. When you were talking, if you see me typing during it, because I'm my own Jamie and I'm fucking researching. So I actually pulled up a quote from Napoleon Hill I'm pretty sure this is from Think and Grow Rich. And he said this: so strong and impelling is the desire for sexual contact that men freely run the risk of life and reputation to indulge in it. When harnessed and redirected along other lines, this motivating force maintains all of its attributes of keenness of imagination, courage, etc., which may be used as a powerful creative force in literature, art, or in any other profession or calling, including, of course, the acclamation of riches, which is what, that's the name of the book, so it makes sense. So the desire for sexual expression is inborn and natural. The desire cannot and should not be submerged or eliminated, but it should be given an outlet through forms of expression which enrich the body, mind, and spirit of man. If not given this form of outlet through transmutation, it will seek outlets through purely physical channels. A river may be dammed and its water controlled for a time, but eventually it will force an outlet. This is the same true of the emotion of sex. It may be submerged and controlled for time, but its very nature causes it to ever be seeking means of expression. If not transmuted, it will, into some creative effort, it will find a less worthy outlet. He's
talking about suppression the same way you were just talking about like anger the other day, right? Like all energy is right. It's okay. All energy is holy. And that is magic, right? Like the ability to manipulate energy, and emotions are our highest, most potent energy, sexual energy being one of them. But for sure, like you can only repress it. So then what happens? You become someone who's like saying, I can't have sex, but deep down there's like a thing that says whatever. So you like become overly judgmental or overly this or that, or the water dams burst and the pendulum swings and you go way overboard. It's repression versus transmutation, which is saying I'm feeling like this need to either connect or to create. Like I think like the energy says create, so you think, procreate. But it's like, no, dude, chill out and like invent the next like, whatever, airplane, whatever the case, right? Like, so
it's the same thing they do in the East with the Kundalini, right? You're taking that life force energy and you're just raising it up through within you. He's saying to use it for creative expression outside. It's still the same concept.
That's a big part of chapter 7 of my book, which is, you could call it the Christ oil, the sacred secretion, the Kundalini awakening, but effectively how to and when to observe a particular time of month for everybody that lets you sort of be more observant of the energy in your body, the subtle energies and things like that, and how to move it up your chakras into your crown. And once that's been done, once you kind of get the hang of it and can feel it, from that point on, it's no longer covertly directing you or controlling you. It's now just an energy that can be like transmuted at will, instead of like all of a sudden like, well, I'm here by myself and I feel kind of horny. What should I do about it? Well, like, oh, I know why. It's because I need to like sit my ass down and go write the next chapter of a book, or I need to, I need to paint something, or I've been working on this project. I should do that. I should go exercise. Like there's any number of ways that sexual energy is productive energy. It's produce, it's procreate, right? So there's a time and place. And even in the Bible, it talks about that. Like if you, in Romans 7, where Paul's talking about basically if you, Corinthians, where Paul's like, hey, if you can be abstinent, do it. But if you can't, then get married. And he wasn't talking about like love and romance. He's like, if you can't control your physical impulses, get married. And when you are married, men, your body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your wives, and wives likewise. Both of you are there to help each other. So don't defraud one another by withholding, which means like don't keep yourselves sexually from one another unless it's by agreement for a certain amount of time, and then come back together lest you be tempted. So it's just saying, yes, there's a very mechanical aspect to our sexual nature and our need to like connect, but there's a right time and a right place to do that in an appropriate union. And as much as you can help it, don't be governed by those energies, but instead use them to go towards higher callings. And that happens as you can move your energy up from the base chakras up into ones that are moving more in alignment with your divine nature, with your ability to pull things that didn't exist before into reality for the improvement of your life, but more often for everybody's life. I mentioned flying, right? Like the Wright brothers, to say, hey, we can fly. Everybody was probably like, the fuck you can't fly, dude. And they're like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. Maybe I can't fly by flapping my arms up and down, but I'm going to think of something. Obviously, this has been going on since like Michelangelo, but they did it, right? Like they stuck with it despite looking crazy and despite all the ways where they could have said after attempt number 72, they could have been like, fuck this, man, let's go to the bar. You know what I mean? Like, this is stupid. Everybody else is having fun and we're out here goofing around, but they kept that energy going to the creation of something other than the base and the material until they created something that now all of us enjoy. All that to say, polyamory, I'm not a big fan.
We could do a whole breakdown of that at some point.
Maybe some point. Funny enough, so I've been asked to go speak at a retreat at a lifestyle community retreat, to do that, to answer questions about how people can reconcile teachings of the Bible with their commitment to being in that lifestyle, the poly, swinger, E&M lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. And I was kind of open to it, just to go answer questions and tell the truth, which is effectively, I don't want to get into it here, but it's just funny that's like such a subject that's at the forefront. And then your friend Eisen just posted about that the other day. And of course, his particular brand is very much to like poke a little bit, like stir the pot a little bit. So that given the nature of the community, to say polyamory is bad, or to say anything contrary to like drugs, basically plant medicine, like really ruffles the feathers of the whole crowd. So that can start to become divisive if there's not like a room to have a conversation around it. But to say it black and white, like do this, don't do that, on either side of those kinds of things, seem to be really hot topics at the moment.
Yeah, we did a whole podcast with Josh all about the ins and outs of why the plant medicine and, the dangers of it and all that shit, which is an important conversation. But I'm glad we did it long form.
Yep.
So maybe
I liked it. Again, I liked that podcast, by the way. But again, all of that is the machete that can help cut the brush in front of your face while you're moving along the path. But the dangers I see, especially with sex or drugs, they're so chemically charged. They produce such a massive chemical reaction in the body among people who aren't already fully aware of the energies happening anyways. So throw in the mix all this gasoline on the fire. They don't know what the fuck's going on. All they know is, now I have felt this massive thing and I need more of that. I need another hit. And then you're addicted to something that you need more and more of. It doesn't satisfy you the way it used to. So you're addicted to this drug, whether it's sex, whether it's plant medicine, whether it's any number of things. It can even be isolation, right? Like I've become addicted to fasting. So I've gone 40 days and you know what I mean? Like, didn't Siddhartha do that? Like experimenting with how to embrace suffering, like where the momentum is taking you. Yeah. So my caution with anything sex or drugs related is that they truly do become addictive, and they truly can take you so far off the course you originally were intending. And then with drugs in particular, they maybe they give you a quick glimpse into the divine, or they thin the veil even further. But what happens is people start to become disciples of that tool, of that machete, rather than the next step of alignment. They start to say, bro, I did this, you got to do it. We did 4 grams last time, let's do 5 grams this time, and really tap in, right? Like they start becoming, this starts to become their false god, because it has become the way. I did this thing and I got this, I felt this connection, so this is what I do. I do this now. When in reality, all things can be your teacher, but no thing has to be your teacher. And at some point, you've got to be able to clear those things out of the way and realize that's it's like a proxy, or maybe it helped a little bit, or maybe it crossed your path for a reason, but it becomes an addiction when people start to make that the way and they start to advocate for it so heavily, or start to promote it and recruit into it.
Yep. I'm with you, man. I agree. You start to worship it as the god versus like as a tool to tap into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just like there's shamans, there's monks, there's warriors, there's different classes,
Mhm.
and if it's just it's a risky class to play, the shaman class.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I'm never one to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak in absolutes. I literally was watching Revenge of the Sith last night, and part where he's like, only Sith deal in absolutes.
That's kind of an absolute, bruh.
I'll do what I must. You know, and I'm like, whenever I see my friends speaking in absolutes, it's hard because I'm like, do I want to speak in absolutes?
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a hard one because I think that telling people what to do, like it's the only way, is not to move.
Yeah.
But also making people aware of what the fuck is out there, like the danger. So like, for example, in human design, I'm a manifesting generator. And so the 3-5 of human design, for those that are into it, is supposedly about experimenting and trying all the shit so that you can tell people what the quicker way is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what I do, but at the same time, I don't want to be that guy that's like, don't you do this.
Yeah.
So it's hard because there's so many dynamics to this. So
Yeah.
all we can do is be like, hey, bro, this is what we're seeing. It's kind of sketch.
Yep.
But you know that
I wouldn't even say it's sketch. It's just like a caution that certain things are so powerfully charged with the chemical and energetic reaction they cause in your body that it may be hard to enter that modality once or twice without becoming addicted to it.
Yeah, I mean sketchy. Like, there's a lot of sketchy ayahuasca ceremonies out there.
Oh yeah. A lot of people that like misuse that modality or that tool or that space. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So you just got to be careful with what you're getting into and
Yeah.
do things with people that you know are in integrity or close to it. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, as close as possible. And nobody's perfect. You know, so that's also part of it. But so that Christ oil thing is absolutely fascinating, bro. Where can people find your book and what's the name?
The book is called Ascension: Knowing God in You. It's book 1. It released middle of March, so it's on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, Kindle, and Goodreads.
Excellent.
Yeah, if you put my link tree on this, they'll be able to find it there.
Great. Anything else you got going on you want to share with people? Anything else going on in your world?
The usual dad stuff and doing this. Book 2's on the shelf. I'm just not going to release it just yet. Maybe a couple more months. But the first book has been getting tremendous. I've been really appreciating the feedback I've got, and then just staying busy with one-to-one calls, and my 6-week guided course that I've been doing with people has been really, really fun. It's been an interesting experience, the way that creates an energy exchange. I don't know if you probably feel this. I don't know if other people realize this. Like when they go to somebody like that, after you do your calls, do you ever, like, maybe sometimes feel like super energized, but do you sometimes feel like sapped right afterwards, or like you sort of picked up what they dropped off? Like they say they're feeling better and you don't tell them, but you're like, I'm aware. I like what was on your shoulders. You just like energetically dropped it off. So it's in me now at the moment. I don't know if that ever comes across.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing one-on-ones for a long ass time, and I've gotten pretty good at like being able to hold space for people, and like trying to like do the Neo in the Matrix, be like, oh shit, and dodge it instead of taking it in, because I've just been able to recognize what's mine and what's not. So Yeah, one-on-ones are beautiful because you can really start to get into the nitty-gritty and understand someone's psyche. And I just think traditional talk therapy doesn't work because a lot of times it doesn't work. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it doesn't work at all, but because the people that are facilitating it just don't really understand the higher nature of reality. So it's
Yeah.
like I've been thinking about this a lot recently. It's like it's hard to there's so much BS in the world because people are just intellectually understanding things and then
Yeah.
they're sharing it. And then people are going to them for help, but they're not actually embodying it. So
Yeah.
that's why embodiment is so important when you're looking to work with anybody, you're listening to people, because you can feel that in their energy too. So, I mean, that's a side tangent, but yeah, I used to have that. I think it still happens sometimes, but not very often because I know what I'm getting into. I set intentions and
Yeah.
I try to hold that unconditional love for people as much as I can, while at the same time still getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, so we can find everything for you in Linktree, right?
Everything for me is on my Linktree.
Excellent. Okay. Well, put that below, dude. It was a great conversation. Thanks for coming on again. I'm sure this won't be the last time. We'll get into more stuff next time. And thanks for being here with us, friends. And we'll see you in the next episode of The Human Game. And until then, peace.
And don't forget to check out the 7-day live shadow integration challenge that starts on May 13th. If you feel like you're a self-sabotager, you're overthinking, you feel like there's this war within your psyche, end that war within and watch how you become limitless and your timeline actually shifts, your reality actually shifts. But in order to do that, we have to reach a sense of wholeness, and that's all about what this challenge is about, the software and the hardware of the body and the soul. All right, check that out. Link in the description, 7dayshadow.com. Thanks for joining me on another episode of The Human Game with Nick Zai. And until the next one, peace.